Okay, I think it is time to get started. Okay. Well, everybody, welcome to the SLIS Professional Development Webinar Series, and specifically the inaugural Wintle Webinar sponsored by the Mary Jack Wintle Education Fund. My name is Dr. Ed Benoit. I'm the Associate Director of SLIS. We are so pleased to see how many people signed up for this. We have registrants from 17 states and actually multiple countries today, which is great. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Please use the chat area to post any technical difficulty questions, and use the Q&A area to post any questions for the speaker for the end of the webinar. Finally, there will be a short 5-minute break about halfway through the webinar. As noted earlier, this is the first Wintle webinar, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Carol Berry to tell us more about Jackie Wintle.
Thank you, Ed, and thank everyone for being here today. This is very exciting. I did ask Jackie if she had any preferences about what I included in this introduction, and basically she said, you don't have to go back to the beginning of time. So I'm going to begin in 1958, which is when Jackie joined the Junior League in Shreveport, Louisiana, and as her volunteer activity, she learned to transcribe Braille, which is what started her curiosity and ultimately her commitment to services for those with visual impairments. In 1962, she earned her MS in library science at LSU, supporting herself as an intern in the LSU Library. And from there, she went to the Library of Congress, and what ultimately turned into a 30-year career working with the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. She enjoyed progressively responsible direction throughout her career. Completing her career there as assistant director. And then, as just what is obviously her civic and service commitment, in 2006, Jackie established an endowment at the School of Library and Information Science in support of her passions and her life work, assisting people, assisting especially the library community in serving people with challenges and disabilities. So the Mary Jack Wintle Education Fund has been used to support SLIS students with disabilities. And I want to tell you my favorite example of this. This is when Dr. Paskoff was dean of the school, and I understand Beth is with us. So hi, Beth. We had a student from Mongolia who was blind, and Beth used the Wintle funds to get her a guide dog and the training for the dog. And it was a beautiful thing to watch. The funding has also been used to provide materials for courses and the courses themselves in dealing with challenges and disabilities. And now I am so very happy that there will now be an annual Wintle webinar that will focus on her passion and her commitment. So thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Carol. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Dominick Spinelli, who is the head of the Collection Development Section at the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, otherwise known as NLS, a division of the Library of Congress. The Collection Development Section selects reading materials to be produced as accessible books for the NLS collection. Dominick leads the operations of CDs, guiding the workflow of title selection, acquisition, annotation, and record review. Originally from Wisconsin, Dominick studied linguistics at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and library and information science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Before joining the team at NLS, he worked in academic and public libraries in Minneapolis, Urbana, Chicago, and Houston. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Spinelli.
Hello, thanks for inviting me here today. Sorry, it took me a moment. I forgot I was still muted. I'm really pleased to be here today. Good afternoon to you all, I suppose, kind of evening a bit here. My name is Dominick Spinelli, as Dr. Benoit introduced. I'm the head of the collection development section for the National Library Service for the blind and print disabled. We're a service unit here at the Library of Congress. Actually, Ed, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So that's me. I guess you're probably seeing me in two spots now, though. Just to back up that I've had this beard for a little bit. So my team at Collection Development, we select reading material to be produced as accessible books for the NLS collection. These get produced in Braille and narrated audio format. We then, after producing these books, distribute approximately 5,000 titles a year to our patrons. I'll get into a lot more of that later. I'm here presenting about the library services that we provide for blind and disabled patrons. And this is, as was noted, part of the LSU SLIS. I was going to say SLIS, so thank you. The LSU, I guess, SLIS Professional Development Webinar Series. So this series was inspired by the work of LSU alum Jackie Wintle, pictured here. Today's session in particular is in recognition of her career and impact. You know, it's the first in an annual series or an annual session that will focus on library and information access for people with disabilities. Jackie established the Mary Jack Wintle Education Foundation to provide for enhanced support of students with disabilities, as well as increased exposure to library services for people with disabilities. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm thrilled to be sharing a little bit about my division of the Library of Congress, which happens to be where Jackie spent a good portion of her time while she worked for Library of Congress. So let's see. Before we get started, though, I do want to address the accessibility of this presentation. I think it's appropriate since this presentation is all about accessibility, right? Unfortunately, PowerPoint slides are not very accessible. Dr. Benoit had the foresight to have the closed captioning here, which is greatly helpful. But I'm happy to provide accessible text after the webinar. I just want to note that there's nothing on the slides that I won't talk about. The slides are just acting as a visual aid for visual learners, as a reference point for myself. But if you would like accessible text after this webinar, I'm happy to share that. I'd also like to start out by telling a little bit about the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, or NLS as we're generally known. So I'll cover some of the history of our services. I'll talk about our current operations, and I'll touch on some of the future services we are exploring at the time. So let's start with just a straightforward description of NLS. We're a division of the Library of Congress that provides free library services for people who cannot read or handle standard print material, allowing these users to access audiobooks and Braille reading material. This includes individuals who are blind or have low vision, people whose physical disabilities make it difficult or impossible to hold a book or turn a page, people who have brain injuries that cause reading challenges, or people who have other print disabilities such as dyslexia. I'd like to note too, this is to be eligible for the program, you do not have to have a permanent condition that qualifies you. This could be temporary condition. So before we go forward, though, I do want to take a moment to talk about library service for underserved and underrepresented communities. That's kind of the all-encompassing focus of this annual series, right? And it's true that NLS patrons fall within this category, but there's a multitude of communities that are underserved across the world. Providing intentional services for these communities bridges the gap for patrons who are otherwise excluded from the benefits of societal systems like libraries. So libraries and their staff can play a part in pushing for equal access to information and to resources for underserved communities. But part of kind of my background, my shaping is the recognition that a specific community is lacking services due to poor system design. It's not through any fault of their own. Lack of representation feeds into being underserved. Underserved is not the same as undeserved, right? So systems are designed without everybody in mind, and libraries can bridge the gap there. So libraries can and should use our resources to address these gaps. It can extend much further than providing access to reading material. It can extend further than standard library services. It can be providing internet access. It can be providing hotspots. It can be providing workforce development. It can be providing social services, community meeting spaces. It of course goes on. I guess I'm focusing in more. I'm not talking about the broad thing today. I'm talking specifically about the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. But I view this as being a pattern, I guess you could say. This is something that can apply to several communities that libraries work with. I think the other important thing here is that we often see that it tends to be a monolithic, limited look when we talk about providing services to underserved communities. So using the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, I'm going to start referring to us more as NLS, but using NLS as an example here, yes, the NLS patron base is what might be defined as an underserved or underrepresented community, but their identity is not, it doesn't stop at being blind, low vision, or print disabled. This is a quality that makes them eligible for our services, but this does not define their wants and their needs. So even within services that we're providing at NLS, we still have layers upon that. We still have underrepresented and underserved communities within our patron base. Because there's an intersection of several factors that come into play, particularly when we're providing library services. And it just means there's no one best way to serve patrons. I'm going to share some best practices today. I'm going to share some things that we do, some of what I've learned in my career, but there is not a magic shortcut to providing services. So in short, if you want to provide the best service to someone in an underserved community, you first need to check your bias and drop your assumptions. You're not there to project what you think is best. You're there to listen, to learn, to make connections to resources, to use your position to connect patrons based on the experience that they're sharing with you. I also want to point out something else here before I dive a little bit deeper into our operations. Some of you on this webinar may be eligible for NLS services, and if that's the case, that's awesome. This information is directly for you in that case. But when NLS does outreach such as this, we typically are expanding beyond simple direct potential patrons for our outreach base, right? Recognize that we're a very niche service, right? And so the way for us to be most effective is to inform the people that are in the sphere of the community that we serve, people surrounding our potential patrons, people who can point a potential patron towards us. So I think, I gave sort of my brief introduction, but I think it'd be useful to tell a little bit about my background and how I got to NLS, because this feeds into, this whole soapbox spiel that I've been giving, which is, I worked in academic libraries, I worked in public libraries, and in both settings, I encountered the need to bridge gaps in service, right? And to look for solutions for underrepresented communities. Specifically with the blind and print disabled community, working in a public library just a few years ago, actually, I was on several occasions had patrons come to the library who were interested in checking out Braille books. And it's unfortunately just not something that was in our public library's budget. And any of you working in a library can probably commiserate with this, that it's so hard to say, no, I'm sorry, we don't have that to a patron. You want to try your best to make a connection in some way. And so my coworkers and I did research into how we can provide resources to these patrons that we didn't have material for, and that we didn't have the budgetary leniency to acquire material. Braille books are pretty expensive. So we sought out community resources, and fortunately there were local organizations to help, but that's when I came upon the services of NLS. And at the time I was in Houston, the Texas Regional Library is in Austin, but as I'll talk more about later, the distance doesn't pose an issue for our patrons. We have ways to still connect patrons with material. So that's the starting point for me, is learning more about NLS, just out of a desire to at least provide some help and some assistance to patrons who are coming to my library, but couldn't make use of the books that we had on the shelves there. From that, as I learned more about NLS, I was already working in collection development, and things just lined up, and here I am. Now I get to be promoting the services that I once was researching. I say all this just to point out that sometimes something like this in the busyness of your workplace and the business of the world, it can be hard to carve out time to research these resources. And so I'm trying to make this as easy as possible to give you some background and some information about the services we provide, because when you are faced with that situation, now you'll hopefully have that to fall back on, and you won't have to start from nothing and research what to do. You can remember, that's right, there is a local resource for this, or there's a national resource for this. So my goal here is really to spread awareness of the NLS services and of the network libraries that we work with to provide these services, so that someday you'll be better equipped to help the library patron who could benefit from these resources. Let's see, next slide, please. So while the Library of Congress has been serving blind readers as far back as the late 1800s through its reading room for the blind, the organization that we now know as NLS came into being in 1931 through an act of Congress. It was formed to provide books to blind adults, and was intended to extend that service beyond just local readers to Washington, D.C. A little kind of interesting historical tidbit about this is that in 1933, the 33 1/3 RPM long play record, or LP as we now refer to it, was invented for the purpose of extending the playtime of a recorded disc to 30 minutes, so that the organization that became NLS could distribute talking books on record. So this was in 1933, partnering with groups like like Carnegie, the American Foundation for the Blind, and the Braille Institute of America. The Library of Congress was able to develop durable record players that could be sent through the mail, and a system for distributing recorded talking books on record. So that player, along with the discs that were distributed, allowed users to experience the first widely distributed audiobooks. Our program has, of course, grown since then. We continue to evolve over time, leveraging the advancements in technology to the advantage of our patrons. So we move through various formats of record. I'm regretting now that I am not in the office, so I couldn't show you examples, unfortunately, but we had various sizes of discs. We had various flexibility of discs. There was a lot of experimentation done since things were being sent through the mail. And after moving through records, we worked on cassette and cassette players, and then eventually have moved to the digital talking book player that I'll discuss today, which uses flash media, so like a USB drive. So over time, the initial legislation was also expanded upon, was amended on multiple occasions to extend service to blind children and people with physical disabilities and reading disabilities beyond being blind, and to provide other items than just books. So I'll touch on that more. Let's see, we can go to the next slide. Excuse me for a moment. So that's a bit of the history to how we started out and how the program has expanded to where we are now. But I think it's important to point something out here. As I've said, NLS is a division of the Library of Congress. Today, I'm talking about the various resources and services provided by NLS, but we at the Library of Congress want people to understand that the library is for the people. You know, the name Library of Congress implies this kind of restricted setting in a way, right? That it's meant for Congress, but this is the library for the people. And like all the other resources of the Library of Congress, NLS resources are freely available to eligible US residents, as well as US citizens living abroad. So when I say eligible patrons, that means patrons who are have low vision or blindness, people who have a physical disability, people with a print disability, as I mentioned, such as dyslexia. And we also work very closely with veterans organizations because, like I said, there are temporary conditions that may make someone eligible. So that's often where we work with patrons from veteran services. So these free services are available to all people who belong to these designations. US residents or citizens living abroad, US citizens living abroad. And I'm going to keep saying this because it's important. It's probably the most important takeaway. This is a free program that's widely available. So the building pictured here is the location of my office. This is where NLS operates. This is a Library of Congress building in Northwest Washington, D.C. The facility allows us space for collection maintenance, collection development, but also material production and testing. And we even have recording studios on site for the production of our narrated books. The National Library Service team is made up of a couple of divisions, broken down mostly into the Materials Development Division, which is what my unit is part of. The Collection Development section is part of the Material Development Division. And we're basically the accessible book production line. We also have the Network Division, which provides reference and guidance to partnering libraries. So a common misconception is that the person has to contact NLS directly or even travel to Washington, D.C. and visit the Library of Congress to access our resources. And that is certainly not the case. We welcome direct patron interaction, but there's a lot more simple way for patrons around the world to access our services. So a unique element of our program is how our services are administered. And actually, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So NLS works through an extensive network of partner libraries located throughout the United States and each of its territories, serving about 500,000 patrons overall. These partner libraries are generally the people that work directly with our patrons to provide the NLS content and services. I'll talk more about this in a few minutes. I just wanted to mention that this is a network of library. Oh, sorry, my screen froze up because I wasn't doing anything on my computer. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, so we have a network of libraries that we cooperate with to provide these services. But before I get into that more, I'm going to talk about the content and specific services we provide. So I want to start talking first about the material that comes out of what I refer to as the accessible book production line. We produce accessible content in both audio and Braille. We produce Braille in both hard copy and in digital form. We have narrators on staff at NLS who work out of our on-site studio to produce the audio recordings. We also contract with other studios to produce narrated audio, and we work with publishers to acquire commercially produced audiobooks that we convert to match our accessibility standards. So that's a lot to unpack. Let me get at what each of those things are, right? So I've got a few examples in this slide. On that table, we've got a couple of different versions of Braille and audio format. So in the front of this picture on the table, there's what looks like a bound picture book, and it is a specially bound picture book. It's one of the products that we provide to libraries is referred to as print Braille. This is a combination of printed text and printed Braille. They're bound within the same book, and these are typically used for picture books. And the purpose of this is so that if there's a child with low vision or an adult with low vision who is reading a story with a counterpart who is not low vision and does not read Braille, they can both follow along in the same material. So this is one of my favorite pieces. These are available through the network libraries, and they circulate just like our other material, but I think they're especially fun because it's a picture book with Braille inserted into it. They're really fun if you get a chance to handle them. Behind that, with the black casing is a collection of standard Braille book. So printed Braille tends to be multiple volumes, and this is a portion of a book sitting in back there. I think this was a 6-volume book. And we do produce physical printed Braille that we provide through the network libraries as well. I'll talk a little bit more about digital Braille, which is another feature that we have. And then off on the right of this picture, we have examples of the cartridges, is what we call them. So these are the storage devices for our modern recorded books. So I mentioned that we had gone through LPs and through cassette, and now we have cartridges that are USB flash drive that have the digital recording of a narrated audiobook housed on that device, and then the blue casing is what we use to ship those cartridges to our patrons. I've mentioned that we work with publishers to acquire commercially produced audiobooks, And that is something that we've been able to do the last half decade or so, I believe. And that's allowed us to really expand our collection and include a lot more content quickly, right? Because the audiobook industry is growing. People in general are more interested in listening to audiobooks. It's something people like to do while they work out or while they drive or while they're doing dishes or cooking dinner or something, right? And so the publishing industry is, of course, responding to that. A lot of you working in libraries are probably seeing this. And it's something that has benefited our patrons as well, because while we, for decades, have been producing, what are more commonly referred to as talking books in our program, effectively audiobooks, we are able to take advantage of these commercially produced audiobooks for really popular novels, high-interest titles that come out, and it cuts down the production time for us because we don't have to contract with someone in the studio to produce it ourselves. It also opens up the possibility for us to expand into wider areas of coverage with our collection, using the capabilities in our studio to record things that aren't commercially produced. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit more diving into the collection. So this is just some examples of source material, I guess is what I call it. And this is just to point out that our collection is very similar to a public library collection. We are part of the Library of Congress, and I think everyone sort of has in mind that the Library of Congress is research-oriented and very academic. And that's true to some extent with certain areas, but our division is not really that way. We are much more focused on recreational reading. We're there to, as I said in the beginning, bridge the gap and provide a service that many public libraries don't have the budget to support. So we come in with recreational reading that is similar to what you'd find in a public library. So our catalog includes tens of thousands of titles, ranging from the latest bestsellers to much-loved classics, covering all interests and age levels. We listen to our readers, and we try to make, we try to best represent the entire readership, which is, of course, is a challenge. It's a challenge that every library faces. We have partnerships with large publishers, as I mentioned, to provide their audio titles, and we convert those to be specially accessible versions for our patrons. And our primary goal, of course, is accessibility. So even with the commercial audio content that is provided, we do a lot of work to enhance that content. This is different than something that you might download yourself from an audiobook store, or that you might check out through your public library. We are taking the initial recorded audiobook and converting it to enhance it for our readers and make it more accessible. So the enhanced content that I'm talking about is adding things like added levels of navigation within the book, or supplemental content that you might not otherwise find on the commercial audiobook. So a description of a map, for example, or the back of the book, collection of recipes that go along with a food travel memoir. Those are the things that our patrons would otherwise miss out on, because they don't often get recorded in a commercially produced audiobook. So we fill in that information. We add levels of navigation to make it more easily accessible during the reading process. And then we're able to take advantage of this, as I've said, to expand what other types of books we can produce on site and working with the studios that we contract our recordings through. So our narrators are able to produce accessible books that commercial publishers just wouldn't attempt because it wouldn't make sense for them. This includes things like cookbooks, So I've got on screen here the complete cookbook for young chefs. This is something that just got entered into our catalog a few weeks ago. This is something that the publisher likely would not produce an audiobook of this. A cookbook is something that generally the user is going to handle in print, right? And it doesn't make sense financially for a book publisher to produce this in audio. So we can use our resources to make an accessible version, a narrated audio version of this, or a Braille version of this. In addition to cookbooks, we do things like complex guidebooks. So a recent example was a guide to bowling. This is something, again, this wouldn't naturally be produced as an audiobook. It would only come out in print. So we took that rather, and made audio, and we made Braille, along with specially produced Braille diagrams to go with the diagrams of bowling lanes. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also do things like graphic novels. For example, the March series. This is something that we produced in audio format, and this is something that commercial publishers now are experimenting with. There's some great success with that, but it's something that we've been doing for a number of years because we want our readers to have access to graphic novels as well. So there's special ways to produce an accessible recorded version of a graphic novel using image description to help drive the storyline. Let's see. We also do more than just books. Our readers have a large selection of magazines in audio and Braille format, including The New Yorker, Smithsonian, National Geographic. And we have accessible music materials, actually the largest collection of accessible music in the world. So these are things like instructional music material, musical scores, and other music-related resources that we have on site and circulate to our patrons. Sorry about that. Yeah, next slide is good. So this is what I was describing earlier, one of our playback devices. You can see on the screen here the cartridge inserted into the playback device. So it looks similar to a cassette player. That is not by mistake, of course. That was part of the design. There was already familiarity in our program of people using cassettes, so this was a easy, natural transition. But it's got, of course, a lot of added features that you wouldn't necessarily find. So, in addition to the content that I've described, the actual books that we're recording and providing, NLS produces and distributes playback devices and applications. So I'm going to talk about 3 types of technology that we're currently utilizing for book playback, accessible book playback specifically. So pictured on the screen here is the digital talking book machine, and the cartridge and the case that the cartridge came in. We've also, I'll talk about the Braille and audio reading download application. We call it BARD. And I'll talk about Braille eReaders. This is something that can be utilized to access digital Braille. So NLS books are provided to our patrons in 2 main ways. We still send accessible audio physically on cartridge. Even though it's a digital recording, we store it on these USB devices and we mail them to our patrons. And they utilize this accessible playback device, the digital talking book machine. We also send out hard copy Braille. So both of these physical formats are shipped to our patrons directly via the U.S. Postal Service. And alternatively, our patrons can visit a regional network library to get these books. Let's see. I'm getting informed that it's about time for a break. So before we go on to the next slide, we'll jump in for that break.
Okay, that sounds good. We're just going to take a 5-minute break, and let's say we come back about 4:47.
Very
And we'll
specific.
jump right back in. A nice odd time. Okay, no need to turn on my camera, but let us come back and continue the webinar. I'm going to hand it
Great.
right back over.
Before we jump back in, I should have done this at the beginning. Can I confirm, is the audio sounding okay? Are you guys getting bad feedback or anything?
I think the audio is coming through pretty well.
Okay, great. Am I okay to continue?
Yep, go ahead.
Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. So I'm going to go to the next slide and continue. I was talking about the playback devices, right? So we have the digital talking book machine for the books that are on cartridge. Very similar to that, in at least design, is what we call BARD Mobile. BARD stands for Braille. Braille and Audio Reading Download. So this is a much quicker access for our patrons. BARD provides access to our entire digital catalog of books, magazines, and music. Patrons can download the audio and digital Braille to their computers, their personal smart devices, or to refreshable Braille displays. So pictured on the slide are some screenshots from BARD Mobile on being used on a phone. You can see this middle picture is very similar to the layout of the digital talking book machine. So it's got the large layout, the buttons positioned similar to what you have on the digital talking book machine, but it has added kind of enhancement, which is that it takes advantage of the accessibility controls that are built into smartphone devices. And so it's actually much easier to navigate through this, even as a blind patron using this. And you have the added advantage of instant access to our books. So it has the same functionality, which I apologize, I didn't actually discuss. The added functionality of the playback devices that we use, part of the special conversion and accessibility that we add, is not just navigation from point to point, but much more fine-tuned playback speed, pitch control, tone control. You can really key in on what's the most comfortable way to listen for each patron. They can set their own settings as to what they prefer. And so there's this added level that you don't always find with other audiobook playback. On the screen here, I've got on the left an example of some books downloaded, available on the device. There's brief information that's available both to a sighted user and someone with low vision or a print disability using accessible access and their smart device. On the right, the screen capture here is just to provide an example of the navigation. You can see there's several levels of navigation here. It's not just broken down by, table of contents, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. We add additional navigation to our commercial books, as I've discussed, and we build in special navigation to the books that we produce in an audio format, so that there's added maneuverability for our patrons. Just like you'd be able to jump through a print book and easily find your section, we want the navigability of our digital files to match that experience. So one kind of unique circumstance with this that we find is with cookbooks. As I mentioned, that's something special that we produce that you wouldn't necessarily find as a general audiobook. So just its production is a way to bridge a gap, right? But we're intent on going further than that and making it as accessible as possible. So we had navigation points not just for the sections of breakfast food, dinner food, dessert, and not just for the recipe descriptions themselves, but for each individual ingredient sometimes. The thought being that a patron can navigate through the recipe list so that they can build their grocery list based on a recipe they want to make from their cookbook that's been recorded in narrated audio. Let's see. So patrons using Bard or Bard Mobile get access to these books when they want, where they want, whatever books in our collection they want. And for that reason, it's the most widely used app that the Library of Congress administers. So lastly, of our playback devices, on the next screen here, we've got the Braille eReaders. So I've got pictured one specific kind of Braille e-reader, and I'll talk about why, but there are several versions of Braille e-readers. If you haven't encountered this before, they're really cool devices that utilize refreshable Braille displays to present digital Braille books. So I mentioned that we produce printed Braille. We also produce digital Braille files that can be downloaded by our patrons. Some of our patrons have their own Braille e-readers that might be built into their computer keyboard, or it might be connected to their computer, or they might use their own wireless one that looks similar to this. But what I've got pictured here is representation of one of the Braille e-reader devices that NLS is currently testing. We're piloting a program to supply this technology to our patrons. Just like we supply the digital talking book machine to our patrons, we want to eventually be able to make this available to any Braille readers who are part of our program. So this would thereby, increase the access of people who wouldn't otherwise be able to take advantage of the readily available digital Braille in our collection, because refreshable Braille devices are pretty expensive. So if someone reads Braille but can't afford it themselves, we still want to be there as a library providing that access. So like I said, we're in just the pilot stages of this right now. It's something we're testing. We're really hopeful about. It's going well. That should be expanding in months and years to come. So looking ahead, the next generation devices that we are exploring, we're in the initial exploration of providing smartphones. Like I said, people with their own smartphones are able to utilize our collection using the Bard mobile application. But we're looking at the possibilities of providing specially designed, specially built smartphones that would provide instant access to our collection and distributing those to patrons. We're also developing, in very early stages of development, of integration with smart speakers. So a lot of our patrons have informed us that they use things like the Google or Amazon smart speakers. We want to make sure that we can provide our services and integrate with those devices. So we're starting that functionality. As far as access to content goes, we're always still expanding the realm there. So a recent development is something called the Marrakesh Treaty. This is an agreement among several nations around the world that allows for more easily facilitated access to print works in formats that are adapted for people who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. So, exactly the patrons that NLS serves. There are similar to NLS around the world in other countries. There are other organizations that serve print disabled patrons, and so this Marrakesh Treaty is something that allows these organizations to exchange accessibly produced material with each other, so that we can deepen the access and expand the level of available content to our patrons. This also hits on what I talked about earlier, which is the kind of this layering, this intersection of underserved patrons. Our community of patrons belongs to an underserved section of society. But within that, we also have our own underrepresented and underserved patrons who are not native English speakers, that are residents of the U.S., that are U.S. citizens, but speak Spanish, French, Tagalog, Korean, Italian, speak something else as their first language. And so the Marrakesh Treaty is going to allow us to expand our collection and thereby provide an additional level of service to underserved in our community by providing material in the language that they're most comfortable reading or speaking. Going further with the collection, we're also pursuing additional ways to add more layers of accessibility to, in all book realms. So we have projects working on producing accessible graphic novels, as I discussed earlier, but making that a better experience. Improving image descriptions that go along with our narrated audio. We are in the process of expanding our narration casting to provide better representation of the character's voice and identity in our books, and also embracing things like tactile graphics. So on the screen here, this is actually a map of our office building, but it's an example of tactile graphic, which is exactly as it sounds. It is an image that is produced using textures, so that while to anyone who's viewing this image, you might be able to see the layout of an office building. This allows someone who is low vision or blind to enter our office and navigate through the area based on reference of this map that uses texture to differentiate between areas of the building. We have similar process for some of the Braille books that we produce. I talked about it with the bowling guidebook. You use specially designed tactile graphics that represent the printed image that you'd find on a printed book. We're also working to expand eligibility in the program and streamline the application process for new patrons. We always want it to be as easy as possible for patrons to find us and to take advantage of our program. Excuse me, the next slide, if you don't mind. So, I keep talking about as well, we're part of the Library of Congress, and as part of the Library of Congress, we are using our platform to better connect our patrons to other Library of Congress services. So we work with the Veterans History Project, we work with the Young Readers Center, with the Folklife Center, we work with several other divisions within the library to connect our patrons to their services and to expand services that they're providing. So we have the unique opportunity to use our resources to expand the engagement with library collections and enhance Library of Congress initiatives. A great example of this are the titles on the screen here. The Rat Began to Gnaw the Rope and That Affair Next Door. These are part of the Library of Congress Classics, the Library of Congress Crime Classics series. This is an initiative that the library began earlier this year to republish classic American crime novels that have since gone out of print. It's this exciting publishing venture for the library, and it's something that NLS is involved in because we are producing the audio and Braille that coincides with the library's publication of the print books. This is one of their, this is an exciting opportunity for us because it's something where we actually get to achieve providing the book on the same day to our patrons as the rest of the world gets to experience. So I mentioned we have other NLS resources such as music material and magazines. I've been talking a lot about the books, of course, but we also have other resources available to our patrons like currency reader, materials for educators, reference materials that they can take advantage of that we produce in audio and Braille format. We provide like I've said, kind of as much similar to a public library as we can. So reference material, books, magazines, music. We are trying to supplement that in our patrons' life and in the accessible collections that they have. But I do want to touch on what differentiates us from other services. You know, we expand upon library services, but how are we different from commercial audiobook services? You know, I talked a little bit about the conversions, but you know, primarily we are free, right? I said I was going to talk about it again, and here I am, but we're a free service for U.S. residents and U.S. citizens living abroad. We also have library staff trained to help patrons. So if this is not the most comfortable, most familiar topic for you, you put your patron in contact with NLS, and we've got people who can work directly with the patron. We have reference material, education, work opportunity material, similar to other things you'd find in a public library. And as I've talked about, the commercial audio is generally, in the commercial audio world, is not intended for people with a disability. We take those recordings and make them accessible. And the described images, describes charts and graphs. You know, another example that I keep forgetting is the Game of Thrones series. We have a accessible version of the map of Westeros to go along with those books. So, you know, these are just added elements where we are bridging the gap. So we've talked about the content, about the services we provide, but I want to come back to the network of libraries that we work with. Excuse me. I especially want to highlight this because this is potentially where all of you can most easily come into play with this. NLS is proud, of course, of the services that we provide to our patrons, if you can't tell from, from what I've presented on so far. And we're committed to promoting accessibility and promoting literacy, but we can't accomplish this work alone. The majority of our direct service to patrons is provided through a network of about 100 libraries around the US and US territories. Every state and every US territory has at least one partner library that works with NLS to distribute services. These libraries, in some cases, are part of large public library systems. Some are independent or educational entities, like the Network Library in Los Angeles at the Braille Institute, or the Network Library in Massachusetts at the Perkins School for the Blind, which was the alma mater of Helen Keller and her teacher, Ann Sullivan. The network libraries are the best example of direct interaction with patrons because they're amazingly creative. It's evidenced by the independent programming that they do to really expand upon the content and the services that NLS provides. Examples of this are digital book clubs, reading groups for blind and disabled veterans, the summer Braille reading challenge for children. Other network libraries organize touch tours of local cultural attractions and art contests where patrons devise their own tactile graphics. The tactile graphics that I've described that we produce to go along with books. They've got challenges to create your own. So these are really fun examples of programming ideas that the network libraries have to really engage with their local patrons. And many of these libraries also work with local school districts to introduce the idea of accessibility to sighted students. And they'll work with low vision patrons at their computers and with their devices to help the transition as, for example, as seniors lose vision over time. They can work with a network library to make the best use of technology that's available. So we've been so amazed with all of the network libraries during the pandemic, especially. Some of their facilities and operations have been altered, of course, but they've worked extremely hard to see that patrons have the reading material, getting material to them exactly when, at a time when people felt alone or bored, and can really use just a good book to pass the time. So on this slide, I've got examples of some of our partnering libraries that I think are local to some of you who are attending this session. So we have California, I've already mentioned, Georgia, Idaho, the Perkins Library in Massachusetts. I was personally pleased to see that I think we've got a couple of people attending from Wisconsin, which is my home state, and my wife's home state of South Carolina. I wanted to point out that both of those, of course, have local network libraries. I also noticed that there's some international participants right now, and there's a good chance to touch on that. This is available to U.S. citizens living abroad, and as I've said, many other countries have their own version of NLS. So in Canada, for example, there's SLIS, which is the Center for Equitable Library Access. We're actually currently working with SLIS to exchange material through the Marrakesh Treaty. So if you're living abroad, there's still resources available to you. And I know I don't have everyone on the attending today represented here. There wasn't room on the slide, of course, but you can find your local library on the NLS website, and I'll share that at the end of the presentation. So I do want to touch in on one example of a network library operations, right? Of course, I'm choosing the Louisiana Talking Book and Braille Library because they're local to LSU. They actually can be found right in Baton Rouge at the State Library of Louisiana. So an example here is the print disabled community of Louisiana being served by the Talking Books and Braille Library they're working with more than 6,000 patrons on an ongoing basis, and they last year alone circulated about 130,000 of those cartridges that you saw on previous slides. And that doesn't even count the number of books that patrons are directly downloading from Bard Mobile. So it's a very active library, as you can see. And finally, I do want to talk a little bit more about our patrons themselves. We hear from our patrons all the time. We hear stories about how NLS and the services provided by their network libraries have been life-changing to them. We hear requests that highlight gaps in our collection. We hear everything in between the two. And over the last few years, we've been doing some direct research to better understand how our users are using our services, how we can better serve them. So we've learned some interesting things here. One is that in a recent survey that we did, where the patrons were asked to take a snapshot of just a week of their reading, and feedback showed that 44% of our patrons spent between 1 and 10 hours per week reading books, which I think is pretty good. I don't read that much on a consistent basis between the busyness of life. But another 44% of our patrons reported spending between 11 and 30 hours or more even reading weekly. So, it shows that they're really voracious readers. They're really keyed into the services being provided. So it's not a question of whether blind, low vision, or print disabled readers will actually use library services. It's just a matter of providing them with content and programming that is accessible. Our patrons have proven that they will use the services if we make it available to them. So I'd like to encourage each of you to consider reaching out to your local NLS partnering library in your state or in your city. I also ask that you spread the word about our services to your colleagues, your family, your friends. NLS services are completely free, and chances are you've encountered somebody already who would benefit from our service. And whether that individual is an older reader whose eyesight has declined to the point that they can no longer use even large print material, a person who has a temporary disability, such as a stroke that might make them eligible for our program, or someone, a parent who's looking for resources for their child who has dyslexia, or a veteran with a traumatic brain injury. All of these are situations where a patron is eligible for NLS services and can work with the network library to get connected. So when you're serving patrons that are part of an underserved or underrepresented community, such as people who are print disabled, keep in mind what I said at the beginning of the presentation, which is that there's no one best way to provide services to a community of people. You know, even though I've been talking about this for the last hour, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on providing services to underserved or underrepresented communities. I'm not sure that there is such a thing as an expert in this field, because it's impossible to know what the individual needs are of each potential patron that you're going to work with. But I am a librarian who's dedicated, who's open-minded and interested in improving myself by learning new and better ways to provide services to my community. I think if you sat through this presentation, you are most likely that type of person as well. So my parting thoughts is just that there's a simple reason we do what we do. We do this so that all may read. Whether you end up connecting someone to NLS or to a regional library in your area, or whether you take these thoughts and apply them to the services that you provide to another underserved community or underrepresented community in your area, I think this simple statement of that all may read is a pretty well summation of the work that we do and that it serves a purpose. So I want you to feel free to reach out to me. My email address is dspinelli@loc.gov. I can put it in the chat. And I'm happy to also provide you with the address or contact information of a cooperating library. If you go to loc.gov/NLS, you can find them there. But if you reach out to me, I'm happy to connect you. And I can take any questions that you all may have.
Well, while you take a sip of water, let me thank you for this very interesting presentation. If anybody has any questions, you can put them into the Q&A area. I see a question from earlier asking about what are the primary devices used for digital Braille and how do they work?
Great, yeah.
Yeah, you touched base on this a little bit, but if you could talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, so that how do they work is a really interesting part of that, right? So I described a couple of the different devices that are used. There are specially designed keyboards or attachments that go to keyboards that produce this refreshable Braille display. And there are separate wired or wireless devices that also have this display. But the display is the really cool factor of this, right? And they are individual cells that are, make up an array. The best way I could describe is similar almost to the operation of a piano and the way that the pedals move, but it's controlled by an electronic input. And as a reader is going down the line reading the Braille, it refreshes to the next version the same way that an ebook would refresh the page when you're reading an ebook on something like a Kindle or a Nook. But it's the cells that actually align and raise or lower in their placement to produce Braille on the device. They're really fascinating, I think. It's just unfortunately a very expensive technology to produce. So it's it's taken some time to get to where it's at, but we're really excited about implementing this on a larger scale with our patrons.
Thank you. The next question is, what about movie descriptions?
Oh, great question. So that is something that NLS does not provide on a wide basis, right? We don't actually produce that. There are accessible versions of movies, things that come with movie descriptions, and actually a lot of network libraries provide that themselves. But it's just something that doesn't fit into our current model. It's something that we historically haven't done. but they are available often through network libraries. So I'd recommend reaching out to the local network library if you have someone in your life that could benefit from that.
Dr. Paskoff has asked, could you explain a little bit about what's involved in the application process?
Yeah, so the application process, I guess process is even more scary sounding than it actually is. It is quite literally an application form. But what's involved is demonstrating that you're eligible, meaning that there is a justifiable reason for you to have access to accessible material. And part of the reason we have to do this is because it's actually written into copyright law to allow us to produce accessible versions of books. So we have to be very careful and controlled about how this is distributed. The accessible books that we produce are encrypted when they're in digital form. They only play back on certain devices and on certain apps. It has to be restricted to protect the copyrighted content, right? This is something that we have the allowance within copyright law to provide to our patrons, but we certainly don't want to cut into the copyright, the content of a publisher. So we're careful about how it's distributed, and that's part of the reason for an application being involved at all. It's not just something that you can sign up with your email. You have to verify that you have the need for our services and are eligible for the services. But it is a form that you would send either to NLS directly or through your network library. You can work directly with your local library that's part of the NLS network to do this application.
Okay, the next two questions are actually a little bit about conversion and navigation. The first one, how does the increased navigation work within something like a cookbook?
Yeah, great. Okay, so I mentioned that we put in navigation points, additional navigation points, and cookbook being an example of that, right? Where we might have a nav point at each ingredient, or at least at the split of ingredient list, right? Instead of just being, how to make pasta sauce, we'd have how to make pasta sauce, and then we'd have the ingredients listed down with navigation points. How that works is they're layered into each other. That's part of the engineering of the accessible audio. Is they've got sort of these layers and sublayers so that someone can quickly still navigate the book. You don't have to cycle through 100 navigation points to get to what you're looking for. You can back out to a top layer and jump around till you know where you're at, and then drive down within that to get to exactly what you are searching.
So a quick follow-up with that. So could you actually actually jump between the ingredients list and then back to the directions of how to put together the dish, but then go back to the ingredient list fairly?
Yes. Yeah. So the design of the navigation allows for that fairly simply, and you can also kind of like bookmark something similar to how you could put in a digital bookmark in an ebook. So that allows for a quicker navigation if you know that you're going to be referencing something within a recipe back and forth.
Could you talk a little bit more about the conversion of graphic novels?
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I think, something I'm really excited about, something I'm personally interested in. So I used March as an example. That was something that our in-house studio produced as accessible narrated audio, and that meant describing the images that are on the page. So similar to doing an image description of a single image that's within text, but on a larger scale because it was the entire graphic novel, and kind of splicing the image description in with the actual word bubbles in the text throughout the graphic novel. It is a very labor-intensive, time-intensive process, and it's something that that's why I mentioned it as part of the content that we're exploring, improving going forward. Because if you were to just go by the words on the page, by the dialogue, the word bubbles, you're missing a lot of the story. You're missing the visual imagery that goes along with it. But there's a very specific way to correctly describe images to best represent to people with blindness or low vision. And I'm definitely not an expert. That is not my area. That is something that my team collects the material, and we have special people on staff who work with the material to produce the accessible versions. But it's something where we see some possibility, right? In the future, we just through image description improvements, we see that being a growing possibility for us. But we also see, because commercial publishers are also doing similar things with graphic novels, hopefully there's potential for us to work together on projects like this.
Okay, I think this might be our final question, but I'm very glad that it's being asked. How effective is NLS at providing more technical resources? Do you have science or technical material? And if not, where do you direct people who have a need for that information?
Great. No, actually, excellent question. And I'm sorry that I didn't talk about this earlier, because we don't have an extensive collection of technical material in the NLS book catalog. There's some things in there, but as I've said, it's much more like a public library's recreational reading collection. But there are several other organizations that provide services that we would refer patrons to. So actually, some of the network libraries themselves provide additional services. I didn't touch on this, but a lot of our network libraries have their own in-house studios and do their own narrated book production. And some of them produce their own technical books. So it's worth checking with your network library, the local library that's part of the NLS network that cooperates with us, to see if they provide this. They also, some of them do described videos, as I said, and large print books, and just investigating the programs. But for textbooks specifically, and more technical material that you might find in an academic setting, I'd recommend either Bookshare or Learning Ally. Those are both organizations that produce or provide accessible audio format of textbooks.
Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit crazy with the mouse there for a second. Well, I would like to just take a moment again and thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm sure we'd have a nice virtual round of applause if we could see everybody's hands clapping. But also, thank you all for joining this webinar. A link specifically to a video recording that will also be captioned will be emailed to you later when it's ready. You'll also receive a link to provide feedback about this webinar and the series as a whole. or you can use the QR code here or the code that Lynn just sent out. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey. Particularly, we do ask, are there any topics that you would be interested in hearing discussed? Because we're here to help you. As a reminder, we have an entire slate of webinars available this year with a discount if you register for all of them by October 9th, which is coming up quickly. Please see the link in the chat box for more information. And our next webinar topic will be surviving a pandemic at a public library, which is, you know, timely, presented by Dr. Jennifer Thiele on October 10th at 1 p.m. So thank you again for attending. Yes?
Can I do one thing? I'm not sure I made this absolutely clear. The reason, again, that there was no registration for this event is that the Jackie Wintle Fund paid for everything that happened here this afternoon. So thank you again, Jackie.
Yes, I should have mentioned that. But yes, big round of applause, everybody for attending, but specifically Mr. Spinelli for providing us with all this information.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you again for inviting me to be here. This was really my pleasure. And if you have any other questions, oh, sorry, I said I would put my contact information. Let me share my email address. dspinelli@lsu.gov. Feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your evening, if it's evening where you are.
So it's just us now?